I said that before she got that and recorded it. Good.
Yeah, that's good.
Oh, this one. There we go.
Niece is in another meeting, so she'll be here right probably about 4 o'clock.
That sounds fine. Not a problem. It's good to see all your lovely faces.
And also with you.
I have to reply to a quick message and then I can focus. Sorry, just a second.
There she is.
Hi, folks.
Greetings.
Greetings. As we are gathered in this space, and I know we will have people who maybe have to come and go because we're kind of in between times. We're gonna pray. We're gonna talk about kind of like the recent updates of like stuff that's been communicated, and then see what other questions or insights y'all have as we think about our work going forward. So does anyone feel moved to lead us in prayer just to get started today?
I can do that.
Thank you, Mike.
Hey, God, bless your holy name. We come from our widely scattered places, hoping to be your servants, to learn about what's going on, what's coming up, and how we can be loving as we go through these changes. In Christ's name we pray. Amen.
Amen. Thanks, Mike.
You're welcome.
Excuse me.
There's Nita.
There we go. So like we've had a lot of announcements and emails come out recently about some big things, and I thought we'd kind of hit the highlights of those. The first one that kind of impacts our work is there was a Judicial Council memo that came out. And so we passed that along to you about delegates and whether or not delegates are valid. We still have a couple of questions about that. And so Nitsa has, as our conference secretary, has an email out to Gary Graves. But at this point, we're not exactly sure if our additional delegates we have elected are properly before the before the body, and we may not know until general conference. And so I hope that little explanation we included was helpful. We have as many questions as you do. Do you have any questions about that? Like, we didn't really have a chance necessarily to respond and process. So any thoughts about that we want to lay before the group?
I feel so honored. I've never had a Judicial Council ruling before.
Yeah.
So, and this might be a question for Brian, and it doesn't look like he's with us, but my biggest question is, at least for our delegation, we were filling vacancies and not voting for new slates. So I am really curious, and I haven't done the research in the discipline to see what leeway there is for that.
Yeah.
But I have to imagine there are contingencies for filling spots.
So that's a kind of explanation that we're seeking from Gary, because the memo that conference secretaries received had a pretty good description, but I still left some questions on our specific situation. So there are different categories of delegates and delegation members. And based on what vacancies each delegation had, they were applying different rules. So that still left us with questions. So I did follow up with a question to Gary Graves specifically for our situation with us having 2 vacancies in the jurisdictional delegation. Is this different? So bottom line is we still have some questions to him. And like I was mentioning this to Katie before, I sent my question at the end of last week, actually the week of Thanksgiving. I didn't expect to get an answer then. I suspect that they're prioritizing how quickly they get to people. Maybe the people that have to travel farther away, they need to answer those questions first. So I'm trying to be not nag them too much. He has information of where our delegation is. He has information about what vacancies we have. So I just expect that any time now he's going to answer my questions and we'll have more clarity.
Have you made him aware that we have a jurisdictional delegation meeting coming up that we need to have the answer for by then?
Ooh, I hadn't thought about that.
So I think I'm relying on Diane as Brown as the delegation, as the NCJ secretary, to keep us connected on that. She knows the situation where every one of our annual conferences is at. And I think she's getting her direction based on some of those decisions as well. So yeah, we're all trying to get some answers from the General Conference Secretary on time for a lot of those things.
One of the complicated things about this, the Judicial Council only answers the questions they're asked. And what I'm realizing is that they, in their statement, when they talked about those Judicial Council or the jurisdictional delegate vacancies, their answer was, well, that could be addressed at General Conference. But after that memo, the NCJ special session was called. And so, which is the next down the road in this meeting. And so that then raises a new question, right? Because we will have a jurisdictional meeting before General Conference has an ability to weigh in on this conversation. So that just makes this more complicated. So the other part of that memo that came out was also about General Conference, and that we didn't need to have a General Conference in 2026 after all. The bishops received that and decided to call a special session of General Conference for 2026 with more details to come. So that was another thing that came out probably 2 weeks after that, after the Council of Bishops has met. So a special session of General Conference is now on our radar for 2026. And one of the, I don't know if this is, I don't know what to think about this. Because it's a special session, the delegates for the previous session are the delegates for that meeting. So had it been a regular session, we would have elected a new delegation for the 2026 meeting. We believe that because it's a special session, we're the delegates for the 2026 meeting.
It just keeps going on.
This really is the delegation that never ends. And so that is what we know. We do not know what the call is, except that it's about the future of the church. There will be more details later. Any processing or thoughts or feedback?
I think they should raise our pay.
We wanted to create some space to like process that and share how we're feeling. We don't know a lot about it yet, but
So my only thought is the initial like language that they were using about the 26 one made it sound like it would be special and limited in scope. Like it wasn't being originally imagined, or at least in nothing that I saw, as a full general conference. So part of me is not surprised. The only part of me that is potentially worried is that I hope it doesn't give a feeling that we need to table anything next year and then say, well, we have another meeting coming up, so let's just do it then. That's my biggest worry. At least in my subgroup with other folks working in our area, there's no like plans or want from that. But it's just something that I think we've got to keep in mind, that we're doing the work that's before us, so let's make sure we try to do all of it rather than saying we have a backup plan.
So now I'm just thinking out loud, but it makes me wonder if we vote on regionalization, it passes, it has to go through ratification. If what they're doing is giving time for the ratification to go through, so that then we can deal with the legislation we need to get that in place. And they probably won't name that then until after General Conference meets.
Yeah. I can definitely see that as being a reality. And a helpful thing to have instead of having to wait 4 years in order to do some of the implementing pieces. Any other thoughts, questions, feelings? Part of my feeling is I'm a little like, really? This. I get it.
I guess I've missed somehow this new jurisdictional meeting. So when is that?
That we're gonna talk about next.
Okay.
We really have become quite a group of troopers.
I honestly can't think that far in advance. It's my brain can't process it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
All I can say is more wine.
Katie,
Yes.
this is Barry. History also tells us that another possibility might exist for why that general conference would be called. And that history is in 1844, I believe it was, general conference met when we decided to split between North and South over slavery. And all the rules and regulations were passed for that. And then, and by the way, that was a 6-week general conference in St. Louis. They met for 6 weeks. And then the churches were so frustrated, they began leaving before they ever had their conferences to ratify the changes. And so the ratification of the changes never occurred. And so if we have anything that happens that the ratification for regionalization doesn't occur, if that is what's passed or whatever is passed, it would give us a chance to do something different in 2 years.
That is helpful to think about. Like that's also a contingency plan if we don't pass regionalization.
Correct.
Any other questions, thoughts about 2026 special general?
Yeah, do we have any idea when the location is going to be announced?
No, what I saw is that we would hear something after the first of the year, I think was in the announcement. I should have pulled that up.
I just want to know what Brian is cooking.
Soup.
I would share that I've been doing some reading from mainstream UMC and some of the other voices within the denomination, just airing a lot of caution, just that good news and some of those other underground movements that had kind of been part of the stirrings of General Conference over the last several years. Just because disaffiliations have happened, those groups have not stopped, and they're not going away. I think we just need to know that as a delegation, and just be open to conversations of anything that we need to do to respond to any of those things.
Yeah.
Matt, I find it really helpful to, and I'm sure you do this too, but maybe this is a suggestion for y'all. I subscribe to like everything, every email. So, and like Facebook group so that I can see what's going on. I think it's really important to know what other people are talking about and what they're doing. And then if you are connected to groups through the jurisdiction or like the friendlies in, I guess that's kind of what they're called, the progressive and moderates in the US, just make sure you're going there, because just the more you hear, the more that you know, I think really prepares us. And then if you want to share that, share it with us, because yeah, the more we know, right?
So that speaks to something we talked about at our in-person meeting, was getting our communications channel back up and running for us, because it'd be easy to share those kinds of articles and stories and things that we're hearing. And I was checking to see about costs of various platforms. We do have within our budget to have the like full Slack version, unless you guys know of a different platform that would be helpful for sharing. So what we need to have is like a ability to have thread, to share articles, to be able to post things and have communication. And Slack, I think, works pretty well for that. WhatsApp works really well, but it's harder to do threads as far as sharing articles. So are you okay if I start running with a Slack, or is there something else that's out there that we could or should utilize?
Does Discord cost money?
It does not.
Because it's basically the same as Slack.
That is a really good point.
I have a question about that. What makes it better than Slack?
I don't know. They really function pretty much the same way, don't they?
Yeah, they're basically the same.
Mm-hmm. When we get something up and running, we will have an ability to we'll teach y'all how to use it. So if it's something you haven't used before. Okay. The other great fun email that came out is that our jurisdiction has called a special jurisdictional conference for January 23rd. And the sole purpose of this meeting is to vote on whether we will combine Wisconsin and Northern Illinois into one Episcopal area and the Ohios into one Episcopal area. That is the reason we're gathering. And so let's see, Barry, you were on the call. Do you want to talk at all from the perspective of episcopacy as to why we're having this conversation?
Yeah, I'd be glad to. The North Central Jurisdictional Episcopacy Committee and the College of Bishops have been visiting about what our future is going to be, the number of Episcopal leaders that we're going to have. According to demographics, we will be dropping at least 2 Episcopal leaders. So we'll be going from 9 to 7. In order to prepare for that, we need to figure out how to cover all of the conferences. Northern Illinois and Wisconsin have been in dialogue for some time now about the possibilities. They're 2 of our smaller conferences, geographically located nearby, with some similarities between what's going on in Milwaukee and what's going on in Chicago, some similarities in the rural areas of Northern Illinois and the rural areas of Wisconsin. Is it perfect? Well, nothing's perfect, but it is a way to care for both of those conferences. The other group that's been visiting is West Ohio and East Ohio. Those happen to be 2 of our larger conferences, but because of disaffiliation, they both have lost quite a few churches. And they've been having conversations about doing mission and ministry together. And so they're beginning to get ready for this as well. The problem is that nobody knows whether this stuff will happen or not. And since we do know that we most likely will have two less Episcopal areas, these two are most prepared. And this would give them permission to actually do the technical work of how to work together. Looking at the model from the Dakotas and Minnesota that was developed, and also looking across the denomination at other places that are doing similar activities. So this just gives them actual permission to move forward and do the technical work of how are we going to work together. Where's the bishop going to live? Where's the offices where they're going to be held? How are we going to do two conferences? What are the logistics? Are they both have assistant to the bishops or do they not? And how will those people function to assist in the absence of a bishop at times? Just lots of questions that they can begin to drill down into and work on. If perchance the demographics say that we're going to go down another bishop beyond that, we hope to fight that at General Conference because there isn't an area that is prepared. And if we were to look at Indiana and South Illinois Great Rivers conferences working together, that's a possibility, but there've been no dialogue. And then we start looking at Michigan and who might they work with? Well, they just merged two conferences. So then it gets to Iowa. And who do we want to work with if we're going to work with another conference? So I really hope that we can go with these two. They seem to be the most logical at this time. The other issue is how do we redefine the work of the episcopacy? It's a bigger, broader issue that we're working on, but we don't have all the answers. And a presentation will be made at the regular session of jurisdictional conference from a task force that's been working on that issue.
Thanks, Barry. That's a really good overview. So I wanna just kind of open that up. Like, what questions do you have? What clarifications? What do you wonder about?
I have a question.
Yeah.
If that does, this is Dave, if that does happen and the delegates that got voted in at a conference that we don't know if we're actually delegates or not yet, how are we gonna know if we can vote or not?
We are very much hoping for clarification on that before that gathering.
Okay.
I have a question for Barry, if he doesn't mind.
Sure, I'm here.
Yeah, Barry, you talked about some of the things that we've been gleaning from the Dakotas and the Minnesota conference. Can you elaborate on that just a little bit of some of the shifts that you've seen take place that has made those dynamics work of covering such a wide geography?
Well, number one, they were the first two conferences to have electronic communications widely. We invested as a jurisdiction into the infrastructure so that they could do things like Zoom that we all do now. And they did that about 8 to 12 years ago, somewhere in that range. And they kind of paved the way. So when the rest of us are trying to catch up, they were already doing it. And so their communications people between the two conferences work together. They have one staff person that works for the camp ministry of the Dakotas and the camp ministry of Minnesota. And they share in some of those things. They share in some of the staffing for a few other things as well. Their work on the cabinets, they've met together. They don't cross a lot in appointments, but that makes it a little easier when you know everybody, so they can do some of that. I would say that the landscape of the Dakotas is definitely different than the landscape of Minnesota, and you would kind of characterize that a little bit like Iowa when you talk about Western Iowa versus Eastern Iowa, and you just go up north and you think, well, that's similar in some ways. And Lynette has talked about that a little when I visited with her about those things. I think there's a list of other things that they have discovered along the way that work and some things that don't. And I hope that we can orchestrate a time for the people from both Wisconsin, Northern Illinois, and both Ohio's to sit down with the people from Minnesota and the Dakotas and hear how well it's gone, what's gone well, what hasn't gone well, so that they can learn from each other. That's kind of the plan.
Sure. One follow-up question, Barry. If conferences combine essentially to become one conference of those larger geographies, does that mean for itineracy that people who are normally itinerant in Iowa are, or excuse me, in one of the Dakotas could be going to another Dakota or could be going to Minnesota, or how has that been looking?
Well, I'll tell you that this is an Episcopal area versus one conference. Both of these arrangements we're talking about. But in the other places, for example, for a long time, we had one bishop that served both of the Michigan conferences, the Detroit area and the other conference of Michigan. And they did not travel between them until they merged. And then the clergy began to move between those boundaries because the boundaries were gone. The same is true for the Dakotas. There used to be a South Dakota conference and a North Dakota conference. And when they merged to become the Dakotas conference, then clergy could move rather easily between those because the boundaries were gone. And so that's true. But when you're in an Episcopal area, the shifting of a person from one conference to another is really a transfer. And so it goes through the Episcopal office. And since it's the same Episcopal office for both, it makes it a little easier to do. But it's not like what you're thinking, and that I could move to another conference because the bishop wants me to go there. It's more that you want to ask for it. And that's the way it happens now between conferences. So Episcopal area is different than a merged conference. And someday the Ohio's could become a merged conference, but you do it this way. But that's not what we're voting on. That's a step by step, and it doesn't mean that's even where it will go. Some of us have been thinking that conferences are outdated in the sense of geography bound, and the Episcopal areas are. So I think there's some creative thinking going on, but no answers at this point.
I think that's helpful to distinguish regions from conferences. Thanks, Barry.
Yeah.
I think a really good example of that. So the Pacific Northwest is an Episcopal area, but like Oregon, Idaho is a conference within that. The Alaska Missionary Conference is a conference within. So like they still have separate conferences, but they're all served by one bishop in that Episcopal area.
Very good. Thank you.
Yeah. Any other questions about that? Nate had posted, if you didn't see the announcement, if you didn't get the email as well, if you didn't get the email, please let Nitsa know so that we make sure you're on the email chain with the jurisdiction, because that came from Diane Brown. That is scheduled for 7 p.m. This is not anticipated to be like a 5-hour meeting. I think there's, this is probably like, this is the vote. Let's have some conversation and let's do it. Because I think these conversations have been happening for a while, and those conferences have been talking about this for a while.
And just so you know, the action will be proposed by it comes jointly from the council, or I mean the college, and us as the Episcopal, but I probably will be getting to make the motions along with a colleague from our the Episcopacy Committee, because bishops don't make motions. So it comes from the Episcopacy Committee, which I chair.
Nate, were you going to add something?
Just thinking down the line, do we know when people are going to start campaigning for bishop again?
Yes,
Are we anticipating that being before general conference or right after?
That is a really good question. And so part of the reason we need to have this conversation in January is because there are people retiring in this summer. And so if we do not make these changes, then we need to elect more bishops, whether or not we can. like that's part of it. So we don't know how many bishops we're electing until we have this conversation. I also anticipate that conversation about elections will start as soon as this meeting ends, about people who are campaigning.
I'll speak to that. We will be setting the date for when applications need to come in for episcopacy at our meeting in January. And that'll come out shortly after our January meeting. I'll be in Chicago for this meeting that we're talking about, because the college is meeting with us and we're meeting with them prior to this jurisdictional meeting and then afterwards. And yeah, it'll come out, and usually it's around the 15th of February, the applications begin. So it's interesting to know that I know there are 2 bishops that are retiring for sure. And there is one that I am anticipating in January, an announcement will be made in that conference. So I'm anticipating 3, which means we will elect 1 bishop at jurisdictional conference.
Okay, that was going to be
we'll
the
wait.
next.
But
Go
we'll
ahead,
wait
Barry.
and see. We'll wait and see for sure, as the Episcopal leaders have to tell us about the 15th of January. So I can tell you, we'll know shortly after this meeting.
Palmer and Trimble have announced, haven't they?
They both have.
Yes, they are both retiring because of the timelines.
Yeah.
That it's mandatory retirement for both of them. Those are the ones I knew for sure. The third one is not been announced in the conference yet.
Thanks, Barry.
To kind of take the next step on that question, we have typically, and in 2019, this is our cycle, people were discerning their call in the Iowa conference, and as a delegation, we began meeting with them in January. Those folks who had submitted, we had them answer a survey and send information to us. We have not done any request for people to reach out about if they are interested. And part of this is because we just elected bishops a year ago, right? And an uncertainty about whether we will even have Episcopal elections. And so as I've talked with some others, we've kind of said, let's wait a little bit until we know what the actual landscape is. Because if we're not electing any bishops, there's no sense in starting this process. And so we're kind of waiting to see if there is an additional announcement and that piece. So. Any other questions about the special session and what that might entail for jurisdictional?
We're using that word special for everything now.
It's also
A special church conference, special annual.
So the way you put it, that's going to be a Zoom meeting or some kind of a online thing?
It will be online. Yep, it will not
Okay.
be something we have to travel to. Mm-hmm.
So this could take us a completely different direction, and we don't have to do it now, but it's somewhat related to the conversation of bishops. On the superintendency and higher ed group, one of the things that we've spent a lot of time talking about has been term limits for bishops and the potential process of looking at what the Philippines is doing and what that might look like in the US. So there's a lot of folks on the committee that are in favor of something like that, but we don't know what that'll be yet. So if you have thoughts or ideas that you would like me to pass on to the group or questions, let me know. My group is scheduled, we meet on Tuesday to continue our conversations in that committee.
And so Nate, for clarification, that would mean not elected for life, but elected for a term and then go back to being an elder when you're done.
Correct. Or elected for a term and then potentially elected again. That whole, what do we do?
Okay, so Alejandro, I was gonna say, I mean, and many people in the group already know this, but that's pretty much how many Methodist churches work, like in Mexico, in Chile and Argentina and other places. And I think it would make sense from the standpoint of view of, like it's very expensive to keep getting more and more and more bishops for life.
Mhm. Any other thoughts about bishops, or just let that percolate? Think about it and talk with me later.
I'm just curious, just a little bit of a feedback from the group. I think we've all probably heard a lot of pro arguments for term limits for bishops just in the landscape that we've been in over the last couple of years. But what do you think there's overarching benefits? I'm curious for many of you for lifetime service of bishops versus term limits.
I mean, I had a thought, and my thought was, wouldn't it be a little bit weird to be a bishop and then to not get elected again and go back to being a congregational pastor? Like, it seems like that would make it a weird dynamic, but I don't know.
I mean, I can see the benefits of the checks and balances, of course, with term limits. I mean, that's obvious, but from some of the bishops that I've known, just like being sent to a new church, it takes bishops take a while to learn to start bishing, so about the time you get one onboarded, I could see that as a potential argument for not having term limits for bishops. If you're always recycling new bishops, are we really generating leaders at their potential?
I think on the other hand, though, how does that connect to if and how the expectations for Episcopal leaders change and evolve?
Yeah.
So because if those conversations are not connected, we may be thinking of term limits as bishops as we know them, as they serve today. But if those expectations change and changes into something different, it becomes more of an itineracy, then I think there's something to say about, yeah, they probably should continue to be bishops. So it's interesting to see if and how those two conversations connect.
Yeah.
I feel like we would always be vetting candidates too. It would be like this never-ending process of going through the political part of things, and that would get annoying.
So that is one of the dynamics that we've talked about, is that it would make it potentially a more political office, especially if it was a 4-year term and then running for re-election. Like, how long into your term do you start the campaign process again? However, the counter to that was, what systems of accountability do we have in place if a bishop is not good, or just elected for one role but then appointed as bishop in an area where that's not really their skill set? So how do we navigate their skills, their well-being, all of the expectations of the bishop, and the system where checks and balance are not always in place as we want them to be, or not sure how to navigate the checks and balances that we have, other than saying, I have a bishop 4 years here, then 4 years here, then 4 years there. And sometimes that could result in some bishops serving 16, 20 years of a 4-year cycle.
So
Which
just
isn't good
curious,
for them or the church.
so Nate, just curious, what are they doing in the Philippines?
As I understand it, and somebody might correct me, but it's election once for 4 years, re-election, and then the second time is for life. Is that correct? Or at least the title they can hang on to.
I can't remember the specifics.
I believe the role does change after a certain point, but they maintain the title with that second election.
I think ironically, I don't know, ironically is not the right word. It's kind of like provisional, like in our ordination system, we have provisional and then full elders. And I think it's kind of similar to that in the Philippines.
I think in one sense, it would be really frustrating to like feel like you are always training a new bishop. You know, like the first couple of years, you're always orienting and trying to get to know them and then getting to know us. If it didn't go well, I don't know. I see the pros and cons definitely. And coming from a laity standpoint, that's how you feel when a new pastor comes. And if you don't get one you like, it's not fun. And just coming from rural churches growing up, there's a lot of them that aren't great. And some of them are still in the system. Not you, but there are some out there that maybe shouldn't be. But it's hard to get them out of the system. But so that for that reason, I like it. But it's good and bad. Something definitely to think about.
I think one of the questions I have, and I don't know if this is a positive or negative about it. I think for it to work, we would have to dramatically change our culture around episcopacy. And so like the idea of like you'd constantly be campaigning and we do elections every 4 years, like what if this was an opportunity to change what that looked like, right? So it wasn't the same kind of a thing. Are we willing to do that kind of work? I think is a different kind of question. Or does that, because of our cultural reality in the US where we are so political, does that mean that that is not a system that would work well here? I think that's what I wrestle with is what is our context, and I don't know the answer.
I think the two words that I'm wrestling with right now are vulnerability and stability. I think that the church feels like we're in a very vulnerable spot right now as we're still waiting on transformation and evolution. And the episcopacy as kind of a guiding light or a stability factor, I think is at risk if we start talking about a political destabilization of it, which would concern me. I think you're right, Katie. I think it really has to come down to what is the definition of the episcopacy and what purpose does it serve before we become destabilized.
I'm with you there, Jim. But the one thing I feel would be to our benefit is that, I mean, everything's kind of up in the air right now, and we're doing a lot of reimagining, and especially with regionalization, I think it's a really good opportunity to reimagine what our episcopacy could look like. So it feels like a good season to do that. But yeah, I mean, we're just in this like unknown time, right? So do we just do it when everything's already kind of heightened, or is this something we want to ease into? I don't know the answer, but I do think having these conversations around regionalization, I think makes sense to me as we're reimagining what that all looks like.
Maybe the answer could be though in the identity of the College of Bishops, and maybe that's the stabilizing factor. I had a thought about our Lutheran siblings, and if there was less of a Episcopal region where bishops were confined to work within and be moved within a series of states like the North Central jurisdiction, but rather if it was more of a call across, like you said, a region through this concept of regionalization, that might answer some of the questions that Nate was mentioning about, is a bishop right in a given area versus maybe somewhere else that they might be a better fit, and they could be called into that area rather than just simply defined to, oh, this seems like the best fit within a limited area.
Yeah, just to go on with what Jim's saying, my sister was just ordained in the Lutheran church in the Colorado area, and the bishop's number of spaces is really huge, like 4 states. But they do have that end of time. So after 12 years, he will no longer be a pastor, or sorry, bishop. And that's kind of their, I mean, they kind of express feelings both ways. It's good. And he's looking forward to it, but it's also bad in that, again, that lack of stability feels a little strange.
You have more questions or thoughts, pass those on to Nate and to Barry, because these are also, I mean, it's easy to see how these are intertwined conversations with that role of the episcopacy conversation. So the last thing I wanted to focus on for today was logistics. And I sent an email, let's see, on the 21st with some, what I knew at the time. We have not received travel information yet from the general conference. I did get some answers to some questions that we have been asking. And so the first answer to questions is for folks who are first, second, and third reserve general conference delegates. We can add those folks to the hotel reservation system that is being made through the general church. So one example of this is if you're like the second reserve delegate, you can room with someone who is a delegate, and like we can figure that out. We will just pay for it. So we will pay for the first and second, and then if you were the third and you're kind of getting in on that, then you would have to pay for your half of that room. So what I'm going to recommend is if you are the first or second for sure delegate, that you wait for that housing information to come out so that we can include you in the housing arrangements that are made. If you are planning to go to general conference, but you are not the first or second, then I would encourage you to figure out your housing and to do so quickly, because stuff will start to fill up. And so if you can make a reservation, if you can book an Airbnb, whatever that looks like for you, feel free to go ahead and do that. As far as travel, the answer I got back is that they are only coordinating travel for delegates and not for reserves. And so if you are a reserve delegate, I would encourage you to make your travel arrangements so you can pick that coming in, coming out time. And just want to make sure I said that right. And the reason I say that in what she said, you would have to pay at the time of booking anyways if they were to do some coordination. And so you might as well arrange it and figure out what works best for you instead of waiting for them to navigate all those logistics. The other answer I finally got a question to is about meals. In the past, we've gotten a per diem for delegates. They are providing, breakfast will be provided at the hotels, and they are providing lunch and dinner. And so at this time, there is not a per diem for meals that will be given. And they have not yet determined if folks who are attending can also like purchase into those meals. So if you're like the first or second or third reserve, can you go through the buffet line and like pay $10? They have not yet determined that. The good news is all the restaurants in the neighborhood should be available since meals are covered by the conference. So I just wanted to update you on those things and then see if there are any other logistics questions you had.
Katie, I felt like when I read that, will there still be a per diem for Sunday, like the day off, or just none at all?
I don't have an answer for that. That's a question I don't think I asked.
I mean, which is fine. It would be really small anyway. And I didn't know if it would be around travel too, but it would be super small. But I feel like I read that somewhere.
I'm looking back through what Sarah sent me. Yes, Sunday there is a per diem provided. Yep. Breakfast, lunch, and dinner will be provided for delegates each day except Sunday when there will be a per diem, which is weird, which means they'll give us like a check for $25 or something. So, any other logistics questions? And if not, what other updates, what other things do you want to share? What other questions that not related to the things we've already talked about do you have?
Katie, this is Melissa. I think I just want to clarify that I heard you properly. If we want to be able to travel with the delegation members, how will we know to do our own arranging?
Yes. So you're talking about like if you wanted to book the same flight kind of a thing.
Yes.
We can share that if you would like to have them book it for you. That could also be a possibility, it looks like, but you'll just have to pay for it at the time of booking. And so do let me know that. But my experience with some of these is sometimes it's easier just to book it myself if I have to pay for it anyways. And so I just wanted to simplify that a little bit, but we can share what those flights are. The other thing is a lot of us are coming from different places. And so we'll have a lot of, I don't know when they're going to start sending that stuff out though.
Okay. Will there be reimbursement for the first two?
Yes.
Alternates. Okay.
So there is reimbursement for the first two from the conference. Yep.
Thank you.
Yes.
We were looking at driving. So how many miles do they pay for?
Oh, that's a good question. Let me make sure I clarify that. I don't have that answer handy, but I will ask that so that we can make sure that that is covered.
Okay, all of us overpackers want to know. Driving. I'm joking, sort of.
That she will charge a fee, I think.
As long as it's less than what, like the $50 it costs to check another bag.
Now here's the challenge. My wife and I just did 10 days in Italy with carry-on only. So you too can do it.
Yeah, you're too talented for me. I can't do it.
I was gonna say Kay and Barry could probably like pay for all their stuff if they just charge people to put things in their vehicle.
We've brought things back for people at several of the general conferences. So we understand sometimes people end up with more books and more stuff than they actually flew there with.
That's actually the problem is you may pack light on the way there and you may need a second bag on the way back because you have like all the ADCAs and all that kind of stuff that unless you just leave it there, they come back with you.
I filled my carry-on last time completely with books because they don't weigh it. So my carry-on was all books. It was ridiculous.
I bet I could design a Habitat for Humanity's home that we could build out of all the leave behind ADCAs.
Go for it.
Any other questions? So I want to I don't want to keep us here forever if we're ready to go. Our next conversation we have scheduled for noon on December 19th, just as a reminder. And it could be that we have more information about the call session in January, and hopefully we'll have more details about who actually can be a delegate, that kind of stuff. We're working on that information. It could be we have housing information ready. So these are good opportunities to touch base and keep connected. So,
Katie, I guess I would ask a question just because I'm new to this general conference process. we started our subcommittee work. When do you anticipate us coming to our group to give reports on how the subcommittee work is going?
Yeah, so that's really the purpose for the retreat that we have, is so that we will have time that we'll all have a chance to share and ask questions and kind of really build that in. And so that will be the focus of our retreat in February. And we should also have the new legislation that will be included then as well. Great question.
Yeah, one of the most puzzling things right now as we were reviewing the content of our section is like, oh my gosh, is this still on here? Because there are so many things that may be submitted by somebody that is no longer a member. So as we were reviewing some of the content at the jurisdictional conference, it was kind of jarring to look at some of the things. I don't think this person's here anymore. So.
Yeah, there was quite a bit of discussion on our last subcommittee call about that they're currently ruling on that, whether they're going to take a lot of that content from people that are part of disaffiliation and leaving the UMC and set it in a consensus removal. So we may see a bunch of change to that. And then the other question that was raised is what about a proposal from somebody that is deceased, and whether or not that carries the same measure. So that's how long we've been at this.
Yeah.
Which is
well, and I like to speak to that thing about deceased. So one of the groups I'm a part of, all of our legislation was submitted by Junius Dotson, who has died. And so one of the other like factors behind that is in some cases that doesn't represent just a person, but it also represents like the interests of a larger group. And so that makes it complicated if you think about it that way. So I would personally advocate for not necessarily removing those pieces. Someone said they just joined the United Methodist Church in heaven is what someone had mentioned to me. That question about what to do about folks who've disaffiliated, though, I think is a different kind of question, because they were submitting stuff for a church that they are no longer a part of. And that is helpful to hear that as a legislative committee, there are no official rules about this. Once something has been submitted, it belongs to the general conference. And so that stuff would not be removed. But if legislative committees chose to kind of set those things aside and vote by consensus to vote them down, that's a different sort of process. But there is no official way that is not automatically removed. So have any of your other groups had that conversation?
I'm in conferences and we're just a mess. Like we just have so much stuff that's not, usable anymore. But when I think about removing based on people who have removed their membership, because you don't have to be a delegate to submit legislation. So like, that sounds like a lot of work to find out all of the pieces of legislation and who is still a member of the United Methodist Church and who is not. Like, I understand the integrity behind it. I think that's like important to think about, but also that sounds like a lot of work to find out, who all wrote what, if you have a whole bunch of legislation in your section.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
We don't have very much in local church, but we had one person volunteer to try to go through and sort through that.
Mm-hmm.
Bless them. Those are special people. Like they're willing to do that work.
That's a good response.
It was pretty obvious in Faith and Order. I don't think it was a difficult task to determine which pieces were proposed by those that are no longer here, and so you could easily.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. All right, friends. Well, we're at 5:30 and I want to respect our time. And I know I want to come over, Alejandro, to your house and have dinner, because whatever it is you're cooking is delicious. So I'm grateful for all of you. As soon as we get a platform up and running, we'll get it sent out so everyone can connect. And I think that's all we've got for tonight. Blessings to you all as we head to our evenings. Bye, guys.
Hi, everyone. Good seeing you.
Hi, everyone. Hey, Nitsa. Before you leave, I have a